Tell me you see him! Tell me he's down! The scream tore through the radio, strangled by static and rain. Then, silence. Ryder Ford froze in the shadows of the alley, his hands trembling over the body of Officer Una Drake. She gripped his wrist, her fingers slick with blood, eyes wide with a terror that had nothing to do with dying and everything to do with the badge approaching through the fog. "Not the suspect," she wheezed, shoving a cold metallic drive into Ryder's palm. It was the chief. This is the story of how one single dad held a secret that would burn a corrupt police force to the ground. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Ryder Ford adjusted the hood of his frayed canvas jacket, the dampness seeping into the ache in his left shoulder. A souvenir from a life he tried hard to forget. At 32, Ryder wore the exhaustion of a man living two lives. The day shift mechanic keeping old sedans running, and the night shift janitor scrubbing floors to pay for his daughter's asthma medication. Willow. Just the thought of his 6-year-old daughter safe at Mrs. Gable's apartment gave him the strength to push the heavy dumpster toward the compactor behind the precinct. It was a shortcut he wasn't supposed to take, a narrow alleyway known as the Throat, because it choked out light and sound. He was thinking about Willow's upcoming birthday, calculating the cost of a second-hand bicycle, when he heard it. Not a gunshot. That would have echoed. This was a wet, heavy thud, like a sack of wet cement dropped from a second-story window. Ryder paused, his grip tightening on the dumpster handle. The wind howled, rattling the chain-link fences, but beneath the gale, he heard a sound that chilled his blood. A gurgle, a desperate intake of air through fluid. Instinct, sharpened by years he didn't talk about, took over. He abandoned the cart and moved silently toward the shadows behind a stack of rotting pallets. There, crumpled against the brickwork like a discarded marionette, lay a police officer. Ryder dropped to his knees, the wet pavement soaking his jeans instantly. "Hey," he whispered, scanning the darkness for a threat. "Officer, can you hear me?" He turned her over gently. The street lamp flickered above, casting a jaundiced light on her face. It was Una Drake. Ryder knew her face. Everyone in the neighborhood did. She was one of the few cops who actually walked the beat, who bought lemonade from the kids' stands and didn't look at the residents like they were cockroaches. But now, Una was pale, her lips turning a terrifying shade of blue. A dark stain was spreading rapidly across the tactical vest on her chest, just below the Kevlar plating. A gut shot. Up close and personal. "Stay with me, Drake," Ryder commanded, his voice shifting from janitor to medic. He pressed his hands over the wound, applying pressure. Una's eyes fluttered open. They weren't unfocused. They were laser-sharp with panic. She thrashed, trying to push him away, her hand clawing for her sidearm. "It's me!" Ryder hissed, pinning her hand safely. "The janitor! Ryder, I'm helping you!" Recognition dawned slowly, followed by a wave of pain that made her arch her back. "Ryder!" she gasped, blood bubbling at the corner of her mouth. "Run!" "Not happening," Ryder said, reaching for his phone with one bloody hand. "I'm calling it in." "No!" Una surged forward with shocking strength, knocking the phone from his grip. It clattered into a puddle. "No radio, no dispatch. Oh, you're bleeding out, Una. You need a hospital." "They'll finish it," she choked out. Her breathing was becoming shallow, rapid. "Listen to me. The raid tonight, it wasn't a bust. It was a harvest." Ryder frowned, pressing harder on the wound. "Don't talk. Save your energy." Una grabbed his collar, pulling him down until their foreheads almost touched. The smell of copper and gunpowder was overwhelming. "Zimmer," she whispered. "Bryce Zimmer. He was there. He pulled the trigger." Ryder went cold. Bryce Zimmer wasn't just a cop. He was the chief of police, the golden boy of the department, the man on the billboards promising a safer city. "You're in shock," Ryder said. though the conviction in her eyes terrified him. "Pocket!" she wheezed, her grip failing. "Left! Pocket!" Ryder hesitated, then reached into her tactical vest. His fingers brushed against a small, hard object. He pulled out a waterproof SD card case. "Evidence!" Una whispered, her eyes beginning to drift. "Body cams off. Mine was modified, recorded, everything." "Una, stay with me," Ryder shouted, abandoning secrecy. "Trust no one," she murmured. "Protect the girl." For a second, Ryder thought she meant Willow, and his heart stopped. But Una's eyes were fixed on something past him, a ghost only she could see. Her chest heaved one last time, a rattle escaping her throat, and then she went still. Ryder checked her pulse. Thready. Faint. She wasn't dead, but she was close. Screeching tires cut through the rain. Blue and red lights exploded against the wet brick walls, blinding him. Doors slammed. "Hands! Let me see your hands!" Ryder looked down at the SD card in his palm. If Zimmer was the shooter and Zimmer's men were arriving, this wasn't a rescue. It was a cleanup crew. In a split-second decision that would dismantle his life, Ryder shoved the SD card into the lining of his boot. He raised his blood-soaked hands slowly, the rain washing Una's blood down his forearms. "I found her!" Ryder shouted, squinting into the high beams. "She's still alive!" Two silhouettes approached, weapons drawn. They didn't lower them. The interrogation room was designed to break people. It was too cold. The air recycler hummed at a frequency that induced headaches, and the table was bolted to the floor. Ryder sat there, shivering in a paper jumpsuit, his clothes bagged as evidence. He had been waiting for 3 hours, no phone call, no lawyer. The door buzzed and swung open. The air in the room shifted, growing heavier. Chief Bryce Zimmer walked in. He was a handsome man, in a way that felt manufactured. Perfect hair, a tailored suit beneath his trench coat, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He carried 2 cups of coffee, placing one in front of Ryder. "Ryder Ford," Zimmer said, his voice smooth, like expensive bourbon. "Clean record. Honorable discharge from the Army. Single father to a... Willow, is it? 6 years old?" Ryder didn't touch the coffee. He kept his hands under the table to hide the tremor of rage. He knew. He knew this man had put a bullet in Una Drake. "Is Officer Drake alive?" Ryder asked. Zimmer pulled out a metal chair and sat, crossing his legs. He took a slow sip of his coffee. "Officer Drake is in critical condition. Coma. Doctors say it's touch and go. A tragedy. She was one of my best." "Liar," Ryder thought. "You tried to execute her." "I told the responding officers what I saw," Ryder said carefully. "I heard a noise, found her bleeding. I applied pressure." "Yes, we have your statement," Zimmer said, leaning forward. The friendly mask slipped, just a fraction. "But here's the thing, Ryder. The forensics. They're tricky. You were covered in her blood. Your fingerprints are on her vest. To an outsider, it might look like you were trying to finish the job, not help." Ryder's jaw tightened. "I was saving her life. I'm a medic." "Ex-medic," Zimmer corrected, "and a man struggling with debt. We found the foreclosure notices in your apartment." Ryder's heart hammered against his ribs. "You went to my apartment? My daughter—" "Is fine," Zimmer interrupted smoothly. "Child Protective Services is watching her for now. Standard procedure when the sole guardian is a person of interest in the attempted murder of a police officer." The threat hung in the air, naked and terrifying. This wasn't an interrogation. It was leverage. "What do you want?" Ryder asked, his voice low. Zimmer placed his elbows on the table. "Officer Drake was confused lately, under a lot of stress. We believe she may have stolen some sensitive departmental files before she was attacked. Delusions of conspiracy. We need to recover those files to protect the integrity of the force." Zimmer's eyes bored into Ryder's. "Did she give you anything, Ryder? Did she say anything before she lost consciousness?" This was the moment, the precipice. If Ryder admitted he had the card, he would never leave this room alive. He would be a loose end tied up in a struggle during interrogation. But if he lied and they found it? Ryder forced himself to look confused. He let his shoulders slump, playing the part of the exhausted, terrified janitor. She was scared, Ryder stammered. She said something about a suspect, a guy in a hoodie, and she asked for her mom. Zimmer stared at him for a long, agonizing minute. He was reading Ryder's micro-expressions, looking for the lie. Ryder held the gaze, channeling every ounce of fear he felt for Willow into a mask of pathetic helplessness. Finally, Zimmer sat back. He tapped the table. A guy in a hoodie, Zimmer repeated, clearly disappointed. Groundbreaking. Can I go? Ryder asked. I need to get my daughter. Zimmer stood up, smoothing his tie. We can hold you for 24 hours without charge, Ryder, but I'm a benevolent man. I'm going to let you walk, but don't leave town. And don't think for a second that we aren't watching you. Zimmer walked to the door, then paused. If you remember anything else, anything at all, you call me directly, for Willow's sake. The door slammed shut. Ryder let out a breath he felt he'd been holding since the alley. He was free, but he wasn't safe. He had walked out of the lion's den with a piece of meat in his pocket, and the lion was already sniffing the air. Ryder didn't go straight to Willow. He knew better. He took a cab to the subway, rode it 3 stops, got off, walked through a crowded mall, and exited through the service tunnels he knew from a previous job. Paranoia was his only shield now. He finally arrived at Mrs. Gable's apartment block in the pouring rain. The old woman looked terrified when she opened the door. Ryder, the police, they said you were in trouble, Mrs. Gable whispered, clutching her shawl. It's a mistake, Mrs. G. I just need Willow, Ryder said, stepping inside. Willow was sitting on the floor, coloring a picture of a horse. When she saw him, her face lit up, a beacon in the storm. Daddy! She launched herself at him. Ryder caught her, burying his face in her strawberry blonde hair. She smelled like crayons and innocence. He realized with a sickening thud in his gut that he could never go back to his old life. Zimmer knew where he lived. Zimmer knew who he loved. Pack your bag, Bug, Ryder said, keeping his voice light. We're going on an adventure. Tonight? Willow asked, wide-eyed. But it's raining. That's the best time for spy missions, he winked. As Willow ran to her room, Ryder turned to the window. A black sedan was parked across the street. Engine running, lights off. They were already here. Ryder cursed under his breath. He couldn't go out the front. He ushered Mrs. Gable into the kitchen. Listen to me. If anyone asks, I was never here. You haven't seen me since this morning. Do you understand? Ryder, what is happening? I can't tell you. It's safer if you don't know. He grabbed Willow and her small backpack. Hold on tight, baby. We're going down the fire escape. The metal was slick and freezing. Willow whimpered as the wind whipped her hair, but Ryder shielded her with his body. They reached the ground floor alleyway, and Ryder moved with purpose, sticking to the shadows. He needed help. He needed someone who hated Zimmer as much as he was beginning to. He thought of Logan West. Logan was a detective in narcotics, an old friend from the gym where Ryder used to box. Logan was rough around the edges, suspended twice for insubordination, and hated the politics of the force. He was the only cop Ryder dared to trust. Ryder found a burner phone at a 24-hour convenience store, paying cash. He dialed Logan's number from memory. West, a gruff voice answered. It's Ryder. Silence. Then a sharp intake of breath. Ryder? Jesus, man. Your face is on every monitor in the precinct. Zimmer put out a bolo. Person of interest regarding the shooting of an officer. They're saying you might be armed and dangerous. You know me, Logan. You know I didn't do this. I know, Logan said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Because Una Drake was my partner before she got transferred to Zimmer's task force. She told me she was working on something big, something that scared her. I have it, Logan, Ryder whispered into the receiver. I have what she was working on. Don't tell me that, Logan hissed. Don't tell me over the phone. I have nowhere to go. I have Willow. Go to the old shipyard, warehouse 4B. My uncle owns it. It's off the grid. I'll meet you there in an hour. And Ryder, if you see a cop, run. It doesn't matter who it is. Just run. Ryder hung up and crushed the phone under his heel. He looked down at Willow. She was shivering, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Are we winning the spy game, Daddy? She asked, her voice trembling. Ryder knelt, pulling the SD card from his boot. He wiped it clean and tucked it inside the battery compartment of Willow's battery-operated glowing shoes. We're winning, baby, Ryder lied, forcing a smile. But the hard part is just starting. He stood up, taking her hand. They moved into the night, two small figures against a city that had suddenly turned into a cage. What Ryder didn't know was that the SD card in Willow's shoe didn't just contain evidence of a shooting. It contained names, routes, bank accounts. It was the blueprint of a human trafficking ring that spanned the entire West Coast. And Bryce Zimmer wasn't just protecting it. He was the CEO. And as Ryder and Willow disappeared into the subway, a drone lifted silently from the roof of the black sedan across the street, its thermal camera locking onto their heat signatures. Zimmer watched the feed from his office, sipping his cold coffee. "Let him run," Zimmer said to the empty room. "It makes the hunt more fun." But Zimmer had made a fatal miscalculation. He thought he was hunting a janitor. He didn't realize he was hunting a father. And a father protecting his daughter is the most dangerous creature on earth. The game was on, but the rules were about to change. The shipyard smelled of rust, sea salt, and the kind of industrial decay that Seattle tried to hide behind its gleaming tech campuses. Warehouse 4B was a cavernous skeleton of corrugated metal, rattling in the storm winds off Puget Sound. It was a place where things went to be forgotten. Old shipping containers, rusted cranes, and ghosts of an industry that had moved overseas. Ryder huddled in the corner of a defunct shipping office on the second floor, wrapping Willow in a dusty, oil-stained tarp he'd found. The office was a glass box overlooking the main floor, suspended like a birdcage. "Is the bad man coming?" Willow whispered, her teeth chattering. The glow from her light-up shoes was the only illumination Ryder allowed, a soft, rhythmic pink pulse in the darkness. "No, Bug. We're invisible," Ryder lied, smoothing her damp hair. "Just close your eyes. Imagine we're camping." Ryder sat watching the rusted metal door downstairs, a heavy iron pipe gripped in his hand. Every creak of the building settling in the wind made his muscles coil. He checked his cheap digital watch. 2:15 a.m. Logan was 15 minutes late. In their world, 15 minutes was an eternity. It was the difference between a flat tire and a double cross. At 2:20 a.m., the heavy metal door downstairs groaned open. Ryder didn't move. He stopped breathing. He listened to the acoustics of the warehouse. Footsteps. Heavy boots, but a measured pace. The cadence was familiar, but Ryder didn't relax. "Ryder?" Logan's voice echoed up the steel stairs, hollow and metallic. "I'm alone. Hands are visible." Ryder stepped into the faint ambient light at the top of the stairs, the pipe raised high. "Stop right there." Logan West stood below, drenched, his hands raised to shoulder height. He looked like hell. Dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes, a nicotine patch visible on his neck, and his trench coat was soaked through. He looked up, squinting. "You look terrible," Logan muttered, climbing the stairs slowly. "You should see the other guy," Ryder said, though there was no humor in it. He lowered the pipe, but didn't drop it. "Did you bring it?" Logan reached into his backpack slowly. He pulled out a ruggedized military-grade laptop and a plastic grocery bag. "And food, and clean clothes for the kid. My niece's old stuff." He tossed the bag of burgers and the bundle of clothes onto the desk. The smell of grease and onions filled the small room, making Ryder's stomach cramp with sudden hunger. Ryder exhaled, the adrenaline crash hitting him hard. Thanks, man. I mean it. Don't thank me yet. If Zimmer finds out I'm here, I'm dead next to you. The whole department is on lockdown. He's got checkpoints on the I-5. Logan set up the laptop on a crate. Where's the drive? Ryder knelt by his sleeping daughter. He carefully unvelcroed the strap of her left shoe and pried the small black SD card from the battery compartment. It felt hot in his hand, radioactive. He handed it to Logan. Logan slotted it in. The screen flickered to life, casting a harsh blue light on their faces. It's encrypted. AES 256, heavy duty. But Una, she was paranoid, but she was sentimental. She used the same password for everything. Her sister's birthday. Logan's fingers flew across the keyboard. 041298. Enter. The screen unlocked. A file directory appeared. Hundreds of folders. Jesus, Logan whispered. She's been building this for months. He clicked the most recent video file. The media player opened. The footage was grainy, low light, likely recorded from a camera hidden in a button or a pin. It showed the interior of a warehouse. Not this one, but similar. Men in SWAT uniforms were moving crates, but they weren't police evidence crates. They were wooden shipping containers modified with air holes. One of the crates was pried open by a crowbar. The camera zoomed in, the autofocus hunting for a moment before snapping into clarity. Ryder gasped, a sound that seemed to suck the air out of the room. Oh my God! Inside the crate wasn't drugs. It wasn't guns. It was people. Women. Sedated, huddled together, eyes taped shut, terrified. The camera panned. A man stepped into the frame, holding a clipboard, directing the loading. He turned, laughing at a joke someone off-camera made. It was Bryce Zimmer. It's not just corruption, Logan said, his voice shaking with a rage that vibrated the desk. It's trafficking. They're moving people through the impound lots, using police transport to smuggle victims across the border. They label the cargo as hazardous evidence, so no one checks it. Ryder felt bile rise in his throat. He looked at Willow, sleeping peacefully on the dirty floor. This monster Zimmer was selling people's daughters. He was using the shield to hide the sword. There's more, Logan said, clicking another folder labeled payroll. Look at this ledger. It's a who's who of the city. Judges, city council members, the Port Authority director, even a few feds. Zimmer built an empire. We have to take this to the FBI, Ryder said, his voice desperate. Logan laughed bitterly. Which office? The one in Seattle? Look at line 42, Ryder. S.A.C. Miller. That's the special agent in charge. You walk into the FBI building with this, you never walk out. You'll be a suicide statistic within the hour. Then what do? We can't sit on this. He's hunting us. We need noise, Logan said, rubbing his face. Loud noise. We need someone outside the system. Someone who can't be bought. Someone who burns bridges for sport. Ryder's mind raced. He remembered a name Una had mentioned once in passing, months ago when he'd fixed the radiator on her personal car. She had been listening to a podcast. Penelope Wilder, Ryder said. Logan grimaced. The pit bull? She's vicious. She destroyed the mayor's career last year over a zoning scandal. She hates cops. She thinks we're all pigs. Exactly, Ryder said. She hates cops. She won't bury this. She'll broadcast it. She's hard to reach, lives in a fortress downtown, and Zimmer will be monitoring the press lines. If we call her, they trace it. We don't call her, Ryder said, standing up and grabbing the clean clothes. We bring it to her. Tonight. Suddenly, the warehouse floodlights outside snapped on, blazing through the grimy clear-story windows like the eyes of a dragon. Damn it! Logan slammed the laptop shut. They tracked me. I swear, Ryder, I checked my car for bugs. I ditched my phone. It wasn't the car, Ryder said, looking at his own wrist. His cheap digital watch. My watch. It's smart-enabled. A fitness tracker. Zimmer saw it in the interrogation. Glass shattered downstairs as a canister hissed across the floor. Tear gas. White smoke began to billow up the stairwell. "Grab the kid!" Logan shouted, drawing his service weapon, a heavy Glock 22. "Go out the roof access. I'll hold them off." "No way, I'm not leaving you." "You have the evidence. You have the girl. Go!" Logan shoved him toward the rusted ladder bolted to the back wall. "Ryder, go! Make it count!" Ryder scooped up a groggy Willow, jamming the laptop into his backpack. He scrambled up the rusted ladder toward the skylight. Below, the door burst open. Tactical gear, silenced weapons. The thwip-thwip of suppressed fire echoed. "Clear left! Clear right! Hostile at 12 o'clock!" Gunfire erupted. Ryder kicked the skylight open, rain pouring in like a waterfall. He hauled himself and Willow onto the slippery, tar-papered roof. Below, he heard Logan shout, "You want a war, Zimmer? Come get some!" Followed by a barrage of gunfire. Then, a single, sickening silence. Ryder didn't look back. He ran across the rooftops, clutching Willow, tears mingling with the rain. He had to get to Penelope Wilder. He had to make sure Logan didn't die for nothing. Penelope Wilder lived in a fortress of her own making, a high-security penthouse atop the Wilder building, paid for by a best-selling book on political corruption. She was awake at 4 a.m., fueled by espresso and spite, working on an exposé about offshore drilling. She was typing when her balcony door, made of reinforced hurricane glass, shattered inward. She spun around, a taser in her hand, ready to fire. She didn't scream, she didn't flinch. A man, soaking wet and covered in grime, tumbled into her living room amidst a shower of glass shards. He held a child in one arm and a backpack in the other. He looked like a drowned rat, but his eyes were burning. "Don't shoot!" Ryder yelled, shielding Willow with his body. "I'm not here to hurt you! I'm Ryder Ford!" Penelope didn't lower the taser. The laser dot danced on Ryder's chest. "You have 3 seconds to explain why I shouldn't fry you before the private security team gets here." "Una Drake sent me," Ryder panted, setting Willow down on a plush white rug that cost more than Ryder's annual salary. The little girl looked around the fancy room, terrified, clutching her damp rabbit. Penelope froze. The name hit her like a physical blow. "Una? Where is she?" "Zimmer put a bullet in her gut. She's in a coma, and they just killed Detective West. I heard it happen." Penelope lowered the weapon slowly. She looked at Ryder's face, the desperation, the exhaustion, the raw honesty. She looked at the laptop sticking out of his bag. "Zimmer!" She spat the name like a curse. "I knew that slick son of a bitch was dirty, I just couldn't prove it." "I have the proof," Ryder said, his voice cracking. "Video, ledgers, everything. It's on this drive." Penelope moved to the intercom on her wall. "Security, stand down. False alarm. It was a bird strike on the window due to the storm. I'm fine. Do not come up." She turned back to Ryder. "Lock the door. Pour yourself a drink. Whiskey is in the globe. And put the girl in the guest room. It has a heated bed. We have work to do." For the next 6 hours, the penthouse became a war room. The sun began to rise over a gray, weeping Seattle, but inside, the atmosphere was electric. Penelope watched the footage, her face pale. She was a hardened journalist, a woman who had interviewed warlords, but the images of the trafficking ring shook her. This is state-level treason," she whispered, lighting a cigarette she had sworn she quit. "This brings down everyone. The chief, the unions, the judges." "Can you publish it?" Ryder asked, leaning against the marble counter. "If I publish it online, they'll scrub it in minutes. They control the cyber division. They'll label it a deep fake. They'll say you're a disgruntled employee who doctored footage with AI. They'll spin it before the truth even puts its boots on." So we're screwed?" "No." Penelope's eyes narrowed, a dangerous, predatory glint appearing. "We go old school, live broadcast, analog signal. The morning news starts in 2 hours. Channel 4, the studio is 3 blocks away. I'm scheduled for a fluff segment on city gardening." "They'll be waiting for us," Ryder said. "Zimmer knows I escaped the warehouse. He'll have the city locked down. Every cop in Seattle is looking for a janitor." "He's looking for a janitor and a cop," Penelope said, walking to her walk-in closet. She pulled out a sleek black tuxedo. "He's not looking for a guest of Penelope Wilder attending a gala event." She tossed the suit to Ryder. "Put this on. You clean up nice, Ford. We're going to hide in plain sight." She turned to Willow, who was eating Fruit Loops in the kitchen. "And he's certainly not looking for a flower girl." Ryder looked at the suit, then at Penelope. "This is suicide." "No," Penelope corrected, checking the charge on her taser. "It's journalism." The plan was madness. Ryder knew it. But they had no choice. The city was a grid of blue lights. Penelope used her makeup skills to transform Ryder. Gone was the stubble and the grime. She applied concealer to his bruises, slicked back his hair, and adjusted the tuxedo. He looked like a wealthy donor, arrogant and untouchable. Willow was dressed in a frilly dress Penelope had bought for a niece, her hair braided. They took Penelope's armored limo. Ryder sat low in the seat, the laptop clutched to his chest like a bomb. "We need a distraction," Ryder said as they approached the media district. Police barricades were everywhere. Zimmer had locked down a 4-block radius around the station, claiming a gas leak. He was tightening the noose. "I called in a favor," Penelope said, checking her watch. "Look left." A massive explosion of fireworks erupted from the roof of a nearby building, a distraction set by one of Penelope's anarchist sources. Simultaneously, a convoy of bikers, Logan's old riding club, alerted by a dead man's switch email Logan had set up before they met at the warehouse, roared down the adjacent street. 50 Harleys revving engines, smashing windows, and creating absolute mayhem. The police line faltered. Chaos ensued. Officers shouted, running toward the bikers. Their attention split. "Go!" Penelope yelled to her driver. The limo punched through the gap in the barricade, tires screeching. They skidded to a halt in front of the TV station. "Move! Move!" Ryder grabbed Willow and the laptop. They sprinted for the lobby. Security guards stepped forward, hands on their holsters. Penelope flashed her press pass, walking with the confidence of a queen. "They're with me. VIP guests for the gardening segment. Get out of my way or I'll have your jobs." The guards hesitated. That split second was all they needed. They made it to the elevators. Ryder pressed the button for the 10th floor. "We made it," he breathed, his heart hammering against his ribs. The elevator dinged. The doors slid open. Ryder's blood ran cold. Standing there, waiting with a full SWAT team, was Bryce Zimmer. He wasn't wearing his uniform. He was in a suit, perfect and polished. He smiled, a shark smelling blood in the water. "Did you really think I wouldn't guess where you were going, Ms. Wilder?" Zimmer asked softly. "I know how you think. You love the spotlight." Penelope stepped in front of Ryder, shielding him. "You can't touch us here, Bryce. There are cameras everywhere. This is a news station." "The cameras are off," Zimmer said, raising a suppressed pistol. "Technical difficulties. Tragic. A deranged janitor took hostages. We had to neutralize the threat." Ryder looked around. They were trapped. The hallway was narrow. Willow buried her face in his leg, whimpering. "Give me the drive," Zimmer commanded, extending a hand. "And I'll make it quick. I might even let the girl live. She's young. She'll forget." Ryder looked at the laptop. He looked at Zimmer. Then he looked at the fire alarm on the wall next to him. "Quick!" Ryder snarled, his grip tightening on the laptop. "I prefer loud." He smashed the fire alarm with his elbow. Clang, clang, clang. The strobes flashed blindingly bright. The sirens wailed. But more importantly, the sprinkler system engaged. Water rained down, soaking everyone instantly. The expensive carpet turned into a swamp. "Take them!" Zimmer screamed, wiping water from his eyes. "Now!" Ryder yelled to Penelope. Penelope didn't run. She pulled a taser from her clutch, not a civilian model, but a military-grade crowd control device she had modified. She fired into the puddle of water accumulating around the SWAT team's feet. Zap. Electricity arced through the water. The SWAT officers, grounded in the puddle, convulsed and dropped, their muscles locking up in agonizing cramps. Zimmer, standing further back on dry carpet, fired. The bullet grazed Ryder's arm, tearing through the tuxedo jacket. "Run!" Ryder shoved Penelope and Willow toward the studio doors. "Ryder!" Willow screamed. "I'm right behind you!" Ryder tackled Zimmer just as the chief raised his gun again. They crashed into the wall, a tangle of limbs. Zimmer was strong, trained in combat, but Ryder was fighting with the desperation of a father who had nothing left to lose. Ryder headbutted Zimmer, feeling cartilage crack. Zimmer roared, driving a knee into Ryder's ribs. "You're nothing!" Zimmer spat, pinning Ryder to the floor, his hands closing around Ryder's throat. "You're a janitor! You're garbage! I own this city!" Ryder's vision blurred. He gasped for air. He saw Willow looking back from the studio door, terror in her eyes. No. Not today. Ryder's hands scrambled on the floor. His fingers found the dropped taser cartridge. It was spent, but the prongs were sharp. He jammed the metal spikes into Zimmer's eye socket. Zimmer screamed, a sound of pure animal agony, and recoiled, clutching his face. Ryder scrambled up, wheezing. He didn't finish him. He didn't have to. He ran into the studio and slammed the soundproof door, locking it. Inside, the morning news anchors were staring in shock. The on-air light was red. Penelope was already at the control desk, shoving the terrified technician aside. She plugged in the laptop. Ryder scooped up Willow, blood dripping from his arm, and walked onto the live set. "Cut the feed!" the producer screamed from the booth. "Touch that button, and I upload this to every server in China," Penelope threatened, her fingers flying across the keys. "We are live!" Ryder stood in front of the camera. Millions of people were watching, expecting a gardening segment about hydrangeas. Instead, they saw a battered father holding his daughter, standing in front of a giant screen. "My name is Ryder Ford," he said, his voice shaking but clear. "And I want to show you what Chief Zimmer calls protecting and serving." Penelope hit enter. The screens behind him shifted. The face of the trafficked women filled the monitors in living rooms across the state. Then Zimmer's face. Then the ledgers. The shockwave hit the city instantly. Outside the studio door, Zimmer pounded on the glass, blood streaming from his eye, his gun raised. But he stopped. He saw the monitors. He saw himself on the screen. And then he saw the phones of the surviving SWAT members lighting up. He heard the sirens outside change pitch. Federal sirens. Ryder looked into the camera. "They're coming for us," he said. "Don't let them bury this." The feed cut to black. The silence in the television studio was deafening, a vacuum created by the sudden cessation of the broadcast. The on-air light flickered and died, but the damage, the truth, was irrevocable. Outside the soundproof glass, Chief Zimmer stood frozen. The gun in his hand, a sleek tactical pistol that had ended so many lives, felt heavy and useless. He looked at the SWAT officers who were slowly recovering from the taser shock, groaning as they pulled themselves from the soaked carpet. They weren't looking at Ryder anymore. They were looking at Zimmer. They had seen the video on the monitors in the hallway. They had seen their chief selling human beings like cattle. "Open the door!" Zimmer screamed, his voice cracking, panic finally piercing his arrogance. "That footage is fake! It's AI! Open fire!" The SWAT commander, a burly sergeant named Miller, stood up slowly. He wiped water from his visor, his tactical gear dripping. He looked at the screen where the frozen image of the ledger, showing payments to Zimmer from an offshore shell company, still lingered. "Sergeant," Zimmer barked, pointing his weapon at the glass, "breach this door or I will have your badge. I will have your pension." Sergeant Miller slowly unclipped his radio from his shoulder. "Dispatch," he said, his voice calm, cutting through the static. This is Unit Alpha. We have a situation at the Channel 4 studios. Suspect is armed and dangerous. Zimmer exhaled, relieved, a twisted smile returning. Finally, take them down. Miller turned to Zimmer, his eyes hard as flint. The suspect, Miller clarified, staring cold daggers into his chief, is Chief Bryce Zimmer. Zimmer's good eye went wide. What did you say? Boys, Miller addressed his team, his voice low and dangerous. We've been played. The janitor is the victim. The chief is the hostile. You traitor! Zimmer raised his gun toward Miller. Bang! A single shot rang out, but it didn't come from Zimmer. It came from Ryder, inside the studio. He had fired the security guard's gun he had grabbed earlier, aiming not to kill but to shatter the electronic lock mechanism on the studio door. The glass spiderwebbed, distracting Zimmer for a split second. That second was enough. Miller tackled Zimmer, driving him into the wet carpet with the force of a freight train. The other officers swarmed, stripping Zimmer of his weapon, pinning him down. The man who had ruled the city with an iron fist, who had turned the police department into his personal cartel, was reduced to a screaming heap, handcuffed by his own squad. Inside the studio, Ryder dropped the gun. It clattered on the floor, echoing loudly. He sank to his knees, his adrenaline crashing, and pulled Willow into his chest. She was shaking, burying her face in his torn tuxedo jacket. Is it over, Daddy? She asked, her voice small and muffled. I think so, baby, Ryder whispered, kissing her forehead, mixing tears with the grime on her face. I think the bad man is gone. But it wasn't over. Not yet. The elevator doors pinged open again, but this time it wasn't police. It was men in suits, dark, tailored suits, earpieces, the unmistakable uniform of federal authority. FBI! Shouted the lead agent, sweeping the room with a carbine. Nobody move! Penelope stepped forward from the control desk, her hands raised but her chin high. You're late, she said dryly. We already did your job for you. The agent looked at the chaos, the arrested chief of police screaming obscenities, the battered janitor holding a child, the freelance journalist who had just broken the biggest story of the decade. We're taking custody of the evidence, the agent announced, moving toward the laptop. And the witnesses. Custody? Ryder stood up, pulling Willow behind him, his protective instinct flaring again. Am I under arrest? Protective custody, Mr. Ford, the agent said, though his tone wasn't comforting. He looked at the screen, at the faces of the trafficked women. This goes deep. Zimmer was just the middleman. The people he was selling to, they aren't going to be happy. You just kicked a very large hornet's nest. Ryder realized with a sinking feeling that winning the battle wasn't the same as winning the war. They had exposed the rot, but the roots were still in the soil. 3 days later. Ryder sat in a sterile debriefing room at the FBI field office. The coffee was terrible. The lights were fluorescent hums of headaches, and he hadn't slept in a bed in 72 hours. Willow was in a safe room down the hall with a child psychologist, drawing pictures of superheroes in tuxedos. The door opened. It wasn't an agent. It was Penelope. She looked tired but triumphant. She was wearing fresh clothes, sharp and professional, and she tossed a newspaper on the metal table. Headline: Police Chief Indicted. Massive trafficking ring exposed. The governor stepped in, Penelope said, sitting down across from him. The feds tried to bury parts of it, protect their own assets. But I leaked the backup copies of the drive to the New York Times, the BBC, and Al Jazeera. It's global, Ryder. They can't hide it. What about Zimmer? Ryder asked, rubbing his eyes. Denied bail. He's singing like a canary, giving up names to avoid the death penalty, judges, councilmen. Half the city administration is resigning or fleeing the country. It's a purge. Ryder leaned back, closing his eyes. The weight of it was immense. And Logan? Penelope's face softened. For the first time, the hard edge of the pit bull journalist vanished. He's alive, Ryder. Ryder's eyes snapped open. What? He took 3 bullets, 1 in the vest, 2 in the leg. He lost a lot of blood, but he's stubborn. He's in ICU, but he's stable. He's a hero. The mayor, the new interim mayor, is talking about giving him a Medal of Valor. Ryder let out a laugh that turned into a sob. He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking. I thought he was dead. I left him on that roof. You saved the evidence. You saved the girls. They found the warehouse, Ryder. They raided it an hour after the broadcast. 42 women and children. They're safe because of you. Ryder looked at his hands, rough hands that scrubbed floors and fixed carburetors. I just wanted to buy my daughter a bike. Well, Penelope smiled, reaching into her bag. You might be able to buy a few bikes. She placed a check on the table. It was a cashier's check. GoFundMe. The internet fell in love with the tuxedo dad. That's just the first payout. People from all over the world sent money for Willow's education for your medical bills for a new house. Ryder looked at the number. It was more money than he'd made in 10 years. It was freedom. I don't want it, Ryder said, pushing it back. It feels like blood money. Take it, Penelope insisted, sliding it back. Start a new life. Get Willow out of the city. Go somewhere where nobody knows who Bryce Zimmer is. You earned this, Ryder. You paid for it in blood. Ryder picked up the check. He thought of the moldy apartment, the eviction notices, the fear in Willow's eyes when the thunder rolled. There's one thing I have to do first, Ryder said, standing up. The hospital corridor smelled of bleach, latex, and the metallic tang of old blood that no amount of scrubbing could fully erase. It was a smell Ryder knew well from his nights as a janitor. But tonight, walking the long, polished hallway of St. Jude's intensive care unit, it felt different. It didn't smell like work. It smelled like survival. He moved slowly, his body aching in a symphony of bruises. The bullet graze on his arm was stitched and bandaged, a burning reminder of how close he had come to the void. But the physical pain was distant, muffled by a profound, vibrating exhaustion. He reached room 404. 2 uniformed officers stood guard outside. Unlike the men Zimmer had commanded, these 2 didn't look like stormtroopers. They looked young, tired, and shaken. When they saw Ryder, they didn't ask for ID. They simply stepped aside, one of them murmuring, "She's awake, sir." Sir. Ryder almost looked behind him to see who they were talking to. He was Ryder, the guy who emptied the trash, the guy who fixed the leaky sink. He wasn't a sir. He pushed the door open. The room was dim, illuminated only by the rhythmic green pulse of the cardiac monitor and the ambient city light filtering through the blinds. In the center of the machinery, Una Drake lay still. She looked terrifyingly small beneath the stark white sheets, a stark contrast to the fierce warrior he had found in the alley. Tubes snaked into her arms and nose. A heavy brace immobilized her neck. Her jaw was wired shut, the result of the fall she'd taken after being shot. But her eyes were open. They weren't the glassy, fading eyes he had seen in the alley. They were clear, sharp, steel gray, and focused directly on him as he entered. Ryder walked to the bedside, his boots squeaking softly on the linoleum. He felt an overwhelming surge of emotion, guilt, relief, gratitude, choking him. "Hey," he whispered, his voice rough. "You look like hell, Drake." Una's eyes crinkled at the corners, a smile she couldn't form with her mouth. She lifted her right hand, the movement tremulous and weak. Ryder took it gently, engulfing her pale fingers in his calloused grip. Her skin was cool, but the pulse beneath it was steady. Thump, 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 thump. The most beautiful sound he had ever heard. "We got him, Una," Ryder said, leaning close so she wouldn't have to strain to hear. "It's all over. Zimmer is in a cage. The network is dismantled. The girls, all 42 of them, they're safe. They're going home." Una closed her eyes for a moment, letting out a long, shaky breath through her nose. A single tear escaped, tracking a hot line through the bruising on her cheek. She squeezed his hand, once, twice. A Morse code of gratitude that needed no translation. Ryder swallowed the lump in his throat. "Logan is down the hall in 412, he continued, knowing that was her next question. "He took some lead, but he's already harassing the nurses about the Jell-O. He's going to make it. He said to tell you that you still owe him $20 for lunch." Una's chest heaved in a silent laugh that seemed to cause her pain, but she didn't let go of his hand. Ryder reached into the pocket of his jeans. His fingers brushed against a small, hard object. He pulled it out. It was a cheap silver plastic badge, the kind that came in a box of sugary cereal. Willow had given it to him weeks ago, telling him he was the sheriff of the apartment. Ryder looked at the toy, then at the real gold shield sitting on Una's bedside table, the badge she had almost died for. "You told me to trust no one," Ryder said, his voice thickening. "You told me the badge didn't mean anything anymore because the people wearing it were monsters. You were right about the monsters, but you were wrong about the badge." He placed the plastic star next to her gold one. The cheap silver glinted in the monitor light. "It means something when you wear it," Ryder whispered. "Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for giving me a chance to save hers." He patted her hand one last time, feeling the finality of the moment. They were from different worlds, the cop and the janitor, but for one terrifying night they had been soldiers in the same trench. "Get some sleep, officer," Ryder said. "The city needs you back." He turned and walked to the door. Una watched him go, her hand resting near the plastic badge. Ryder stepped out of the room and stopped dead. The hallway was no longer empty. While he had been inside, the corridor had filled. Not with doctors, not with reporters, but with police. There were dozens of them, a sea of navy blue lining the walls. They were the beat cops, the rookies, the traffic officers, the old-timers who worked the desk, the ones who hadn't been on Zimmer's payroll, the ones who had watched the broadcast in horror, realizing their uniform had been hijacked by a criminal. The silence was absolute. No radios crackled, no phones rang. Ryder hesitated, his instinct to shrink away, to make himself invisible, flaring up. He tightened his grip on his backpack strap. "Excuse me," he mumbled, trying to pass. The officer nearest to him, a grizzled sergeant with weary eyes, didn't move out of the way. Instead, he snapped his heels together. It started as a ripple and became a wave. Down the line, 50 officers straightened their spines. 50 chins lifted. 50 hands rose in unison to their brows. They didn't bow. They didn't nod. They saluted. It wasn't a salute for a superior officer. It wasn't protocol. It was a salute for a soldier. A salute for a father who had walked into the fire with nothing but a wrench and a terrifying amount of love, and had done what they had sworn to do, but couldn't. Ryder stood there, stunned, the fluorescent lights blurring through the sudden tears in his eyes. He realized then that he wasn't just a janitor anymore. He was the man who had cleaned the filth they couldn't reach. He nodded, once, a sharp acknowledgement of their respect, and walked through the gauntlet. He pushed through the double doors at the end of the hall, past the swarm of media vans camped outside, past the protesters chanting for justice, and stepped into the sunlight. The storm that had battered Seattle for 3 days had finally broken. The gray clouds were peeling back like a healing wound, revealing a sky of piercing, impossible blue. The air tasted sweet, washed clean of the ozone and gunpowder. He saw them on a park bench near the fountain. Mrs. Gable was knitting, looking anxious, and there, swinging her legs and eating a chocolate ice cream cone that was melting faster than she could lick it, was Willow. She looked up as he approached. Her face lit up, a sunrise that eclipsed the one overhead. "Daddy!" She jumped off the bench, ignoring the ice cream dripping onto her dress, and ran to him. Ryder dropped to one knee, ignoring the pain in his ribs, and caught her. He buried his face in her strawberry blonde hair, breathing in the scent of sugar and innocence. She felt solid. She felt real. She felt safe. Ready to go, Bug? Ryder asked, pulling back to wipe a smudge of chocolate from her chin. Where are we going, Daddy? Willow asked, her eyes wide. Back to the basement? Is the bad man still looking? Ryder stood up, lifting her easily into his arms. He felt the check in his pocket, the paper that promised a future. But looking at her, he realized the real treasure wasn't the money. It was the fact that she didn't have to be afraid of the dark anymore. He looked at the skyline, at the glass towers, and then turned his back on them. No, baby, he smiled, and it was the first real smile he had smiled in years. No more basements. We're going somewhere dry, somewhere with big open skies and horses, somewhere safe. Willow squealed with delight, wrapping her sticky arms around his neck. For the first time in his life, the invisible weight on Ryder's shoulders, the debt, the fear, the shame, was gone. Karma had hit. The bad guys were in chains. The city was waking up. And the janitor? The janitor was finally clean. Ryder Ford didn't just survive, he rebuilt. Using the donation money, he bought a small ranch in Montana, far from the grime and the noise of the city. It wasn't a mansion, but it had a view of the mountains and air that didn't taste like exhaust. Logan West eventually retired from the force, his leg never quite healing enough for active duty. He moved into the guest cabin on Ryder's ranch, becoming the grumpy uncle Willow adored, teaching her how to fish and how to throw a punch. Una Drake recovered. She didn't quit. She became the new captain of the precinct, leading a task force that purged the corruption root and branch. She kept the plastic badge Ryder left her on her desk, a reminder of the cost of silence. Zimmer died in prison 2 years later, stabbed in the showers by an inmate who had a sister in that warehouse. It was a stark reminder that justice isn't always swift, and it isn't always pretty. Sometimes it looks like a desperate father in a stolen tuxedo, fighting for the only thing that matters. They thought he was nobody. They thought he was just a janitor they could sweep under the rug. They were wrong. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and subscribe for more tales of underdog justice. Share this video if you believe that sometimes the ordinary man is the most dangerous hero of all. What would you do to protect your family? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe and watch your six.